Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on political and economic systems, how they're completely screwed up, and what we can do about it. Now, in the last episode, I tackled the system of capitalism, which is used by most of the countries in the world. It's a system that seems fine on a surface level, but the deeper you look, the more you realize there's nothing to keep it from devolving into horrible evilness, and oh whoops, it has. So today we're going to be talking about the most commonly proposed alternative to capitalism, which is socialism. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, socialism and its many branches were mostly started by this guy named Karl Marx, although if you look back in history, you can find lots of different groups that used basically the same system he outlined before he outlined it. But there's a lot of different versions of socialism. The lowest level version is basically just let's keep everything in capitalism basically as it is, but switch ownership. So instead of a rich person owning a company and getting all the profit from the people working at the company, all of the people who work at the company collectively own the company and get all the profit from the company collectively. And while that's better, it still doesn't really address the issue of infinite growth that plagues capitalism. I mean, sure, you as an individual piece of a large company may not have as much power to do bad things as Jeff Bezos on his own, but you do have basically the same motivations, right? Like, if your profit is determined based on a percentage of what the company makes, then you want the company to make more money. It's basically just saying shareholders are workers and workers are shareholders, but all of the things that shareholders do to negatively influence companies right now would still happen, more or less, except the things that disadvantage workers because the shareholders are workers, so they wouldn't vote on anything that disadvantages them directly. But they might not care about anything that disadvantages people other than them. It's absolutely true that spreading out the power and authority across the masses makes it more friendly, a little bit harder to corrupt and do crazy bad things with, but it's not as if there's no way for things to go wrong in a democratic system. I mean, people have literally been writing about the tyranny of the majority since fucking Plato or Aristotle, you know? So while a large group of people holding the power are less likely to abuse it in ways that hurt the smaller groups, it's not in any way impossible, and there's nothing inherent to the system of socialism, as outlined above, that does anything about that. So it's a step forward, but it doesn't fix all the problems. Of course, people realize that this doesn't fix all the problems, and that's why there are more advanced versions of the idea. For example, communism, which I know is a bit of a dirty word in America because Russia and China and I guess North Korea too, and Cuba. But the simple fact is that none of those countries actually follow communism as it was originally laid out. They're just like using that word so that they can get the support of the people so that they can maintain power. Because all of those countries are autocratic, and autocrats need to convince people that they're doing the right thing in order to gain power, and once they have power, they can just do whatever they want. However, as it was originally laid out, communism is supposed to be a stateless system where goods and services are provided from each according to their means, to each according to their needs, which sounds nice in theory, I guess, but the problem is, how do you determine what a person's means are and what a person's needs are? Who's in charge of determining that if you don't have some sort of board of people who oversees these things? And also, in that definition at least, it makes it sound like you're going on a very low level, individuals just sort of making things and then giving them to their neighbors and stuff, which just isn't going to last. You know, in order to make something that stands the test of time, you need systemic things in place that ensure it will always be that way. You need legal protections and enforcement and yada, yada, yada. And that doesn't happen if you get rid of the state. Now, some alternatives have been proposed, which basically amount to government with extra steps to make it not as powerful, which seems counterproductive, but whatever. From listening to a few people talk about communism and anarcho-communism, it seems like most people have a issue with the fact that the government is currently set up in a hierarchy and they want something more horizontal where power is distributed more evenly across a larger number of people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does have a lot of trade-offs, right? Like inefficiency and indecisiveness, for one thing. For example, there's a lot of very far right-leaning people who claim to be in favor of smaller government without actually being in favor of smaller government. But one thing they point to is like the early American Articles of Confederation that we had before we set up a real constitution that actually worked and did stuff. And they often overlook how like literally nothing got done under that system at all, because no one could agree on what to do, and therefore nothing got done. And that's not helpful. Like, I do understand that in a system where the government doesn't have your best interest at heart, you want the government to not be able to do things because then they don't do things that disadvantage you. But what if they did have your best interests at heart and you just still weren't able to do things, and now you're missing out on all of the helpful things that they might do for you? One of the big problems with eliminating the state is that it kind of gets rid of any ability to improve the idea of a state. Sure, the current government system is completely pointless and awful and kind of irredeemable, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't make a system that lives up to the ideals that were laid out and is actually good because it actually follows those ideals. If you had a system that actually was by the people, for the people, and of the people, then you would want that system to have a lot of flexibility and power so that it could do the good things that the people want it to do. And I think saying governments are inherently bad, so we don't want any more governments, is just completely missing that opportunity. It's limiting your idea of what kinds of things we could do with a government and how we could make it work for us, with us, to do the good things that we want it to do. I'm not saying that's a possible reform with any of the current government systems that I'm aware of. I'm just saying if you build something from the ground up with that in mind and aren't disingenuous about it, then, that would be a hell of a lot better than the non-existent or very limited government that communists tend to want. Overall, communism and socialism are both big steps forward from the current capitalist system, but I feel like neither of them really do enough to fix the underlying problems beyond these things. Like letting people own the things that they make and the means by which they make them is nice, and it means that workers aren't getting exploited, but it doesn't really mean that anyone else isn't getting exploited, and it doesn't change the incentive to accrue wealth. It just spreads that wealth out a little bit more amongst the workers. But here's the thing, if, for example, Amazon existed in a communist system, it would still be worth $1 trillion. Amazon would still be $1 trillion company. It's just that those $1 trillion would be spread out amongst all of the employees instead of directly in the hands of the people at the top of the company. If Exxon was entirely owned by the people who work at Exxon, they'd still want to dig up oil and use it in cars and pollute the air with it because that's their livelihood still. They don't have any motivation to get rid of their own livelihood in that way. Realistically, full-blown socialism in the workplace isn't that different from workers who have stock and are a part of a union, which are both things that happen pretty regularly in the current capitalist system. Not as regularly as they should, because for some reason, union busting is allowed to go unpunished for reasons that are beyond me. The law just isn't enforced. But, you know, it doesn't completely change the dynamic of the system as a whole. It just shifts who has the control, which might help or it might not. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it is a step forward and it's always good to take a step forward. I just think that if we really want to fix all of our problems, we need to do a lot more than just, spread out the power. We need to, actually change the way our systems work from the ground up so that they work for us and not against us. So yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Alright, thank you guys for watching that video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that dumb YouTube stuff. Follow me on all my other social media stuff. I got Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and I have a Patreon, if and only if you have money to burn. And if you do have money to burn, maybe consider donating to an actual charity instead. There are always a few linked in my description, just in case. I mean, I do appreciate it, but there's probably people who can use it more than me. Me and my girlfriend play video games she's never played before on twitch.tv/thegolden every Saturday, sometime after 6 p.m. US Mountain Time. And also I sometimes use that channel to do challenge runs and game creation tutorials. So if you're into any of that, please check that out. Also, if you check out our streams and you like the performance that my girlfriend puts on, she streams by herself on her own channel called Awesome Possum Pie. And be sure to leave positive comments down below for my girlfriend who volunteered to edit my videos for free because she's awesome. And yeah, thanks so much for all of your support. And thanks again for watching.